Hi everybody, it's Mr. Stevens here. We are back with Son of the Morning Star, Custer and the Little Bighorn by Evan S. Connell. We are going to jump right back in where we left off in the last video. I hope you guys are still enjoying it, and without further ado, let's begin. After 23 years in uniform, Reno was dishonorably discharged. Then, it was steeply downhill. He had no idea what to do, he could not get a job, he borrowed money from his son, he moved to Washington where he met a government clerk named Isabella Ray, and in January of 1884, they got married. After a few months, she left him. Finally, the Bureau of Pensions hired him as an examiner. He thought people might like to know about the Little Bighorn, so he advised the New York Weekly Press that he still had his diary, quote, written on the battlefield, lying in the grass, within scent of the dead horses. And he wondered if the editor might be interested in a contribution. When the editor said yes, Reno mailed him an account of the fight. It was rejected. In Nashville, his son married a whiskey heiress, Miss Idie Kinney, but Reno did not attend the wedding. He explained that he was too busy, which was untrue. He could just not afford the train fare to Nashville. Such indignance must have been corrosive because, according to one biographer, who does not provide much documentation, he was a descendant of Philippe Francois Renault, who accompanied Lafayette to America in 1777. This distinguished ancestor was rewarded by the United States with tracts of land said to have been worth $400 million by the 19th century, but litigation prevented Reno from tasting this marvelous pie. Another biographer states that he was a descendant of French Huguenots named Renaud, who fled to Virginia in the early 18th century, and no reference is made to prodigious wealth. 400 million or not, his first wife unquestionably was rich, while he himself could not buy a ticket to Nashville. His star glittered darkly until the end. He developed cancer of the tongue and died after an operation at Providence Hospital. On March 29, 1889, the Washington Evening Star took notice, quote, Reno. In this city died Marcus A. Reno, late Major and Brevet Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army. General Custer's widow, who lived into her 90s, held him responsible for what happened at the Little Bighorn. In 1926, she was invited to Montana for the 50th anniversary, at which time a monument to the hapless major would be unveiled. She answered with a letter of dismay, urging that no memorial to so great a coward as Major Reno be situated on the field. Quote, in writing this, she continued, I feel almost my husband's hand taking the pen away from me. I long for a memorial to our heroes on the battlefield of the Little Bighorn, but not to a single out for honor, the one coward of the regiment. If she was the last to forgive, Major General Thomas Rosser, who had been Custer's roommate at West Point, surely was among the first to condemn. Only 2 days after the astounding headlines, a letter from him was published by the St. Paul Pioneer Press. I feel that Custer would have succeeded had Reno, with all the reserve of 7 companies, passed through and joined Custer after the first repulse. As a soldier, I would sooner today lie in the grave of General Custer and his gallant comrades alone in that distant wilderness, that when the last trumpet sounds I could rise to judgment from my post of duty than to live in the place of the survivors of the siege on that hill. Everybody had an opinion. On March 8, 1879, the Army and Navy Journal reprinted a letter from the National Republican by a member of the 1st Cavalry, which said in part, quote, my estimate of Reno and Custer is this. The former was brave but not rash, and Custer was both. Through rashness, Custer and the 3rd Cavalry Division got surrounded at Trevilian Station in 1864, and it was a brave but not a rash man who cut him out. I mean Wesley Merritt, who commanded the 1st Cavalry, of which Marcus Reno's regiment formed a part. It was Custer's rashness that got him into the little scrape at the Little Bighorn in 1876. It would require a larger force than Reno had at his command to cut him out. Another critic thought the assault failed because of Reno's timidity. Quote, because the Sioux shook their blankets at him. Years after the Major's death, a great-nephew, Charles Reno, asked that the official charges against him be re-examined. This was done, and the Judge Advocate General's office concluded that he had been improperly dismissed, which was perhaps the only bit of decent luck Reno ever had. On September 9, 1967, a unique ceremony began at the First Christian Church in Billings, Montana. Major Reno's casket, followed by the traditional riderless horse, was escorted by units of the Montana National Guard from the church to the battlefield 60 miles southeast, where the honors were presented, an 11-gun salute signifying his Civil War brevet rank of Brigadier General, and 3 rifle volleys across his new grave. Elizabeth would have been disgusted. Although the bones of many troopers lie on the field, the only man to be buried with such pomp at the Custer National Cemetery was the one she could not abide. Now this man with the dark face rests a few steps due north of the flagpole, his rank posthumously restored, while the posthumous squabble about his cowardice goes on and on. That he was at least temporarily unsettled or incapacitated is admitted by all scholars, amateur or professional, and there are some who look upon this troubled man with the utmost virulence. Quite often, those who most flagrantly despised him are career soldiers, which at first sounds like a paradox, but of course it is natural. Captain R.G. Carter, for instance, himself a veteran Indian fighter of the celebrated 4th Cavalry, made this comment, quote, "Reno showed the white leather from the start, and his entire conduct was that of white liver, yellow street coward. He was terrorized and panic-stricken. He should have been tried and cashiered for the part he took in Custer's last fight. If ever there was a pusillanimous poltroon in the army whose name should be handed down to future generations as an arrant coward, Marcus A. Reno is that man." Lieutenant Edward Matthey testified during the Chicago inquiry that he had heard many discussions of the fight and many opinions offered, but one expression in particular he could not forget. He did not identify the speaker, but he heard somebody say, quote, "If we had not been commanded by a coward, we all would have been killed." A religious magazine, the Northwestern Christian Advocate, assigned the blame not exactly to cowardice. Quote, "What, then, was the explanation of the conduct at the Battle of Little Bighorn? He was drunk." This is another disputed charge. Whiskey was indeed dispensed from traders' boats on the Yellowstone, along with the champagne cider and such commonplace produce as butter, eggs, vegetables, pickles, lemons, licorice root, tinned salmon, chewing tobacco, shoelaces, thread, needles, etc. Out of cider and bourbon a drink was invented, christened Rosebud to honor this desolate region, and drunks were exiled to the prairie until they got over it, which probably did not take long. Considering the possibility of Sioux warriors whooping over the nearest ridge, James Coleman set up shop in a tent at General Terry's base camp, a wall of canned goods separating officers and men. Prices were the same on either side, whiskey $1 a pint, although if a soldier wanted his 3-pint canteen filled to the brim with Old Tanglefoot, he needed an okay from the captain. An Arikara named Red Star said Coleman's tent was black with thirsty soldiers, like a swarm of flies. So it would have been easy enough for Major Reno to fill his canteen and numerous other containers before leaving the Yellowstone. Indeed, it would be unusual for a man who enjoyed drinking as much as he did to pass up the opportunity, especially when he knew that within a week he might lose his scalp. The ingenuity of soldiers when confronted with the problem of transporting alcohol cannot be overestimated. The most unlikely receptacles were found. Officers, more or less exempt from personal inspection, might drape a loaded goatskin across the saddle, but enlisted men were obligated to be circumspect. During the Civil War, for instance, they discovered that a rifle barrel would hold several jolts. Ulysses Grant, despite his rank, is said to have benefited from this. Indian scouts later said that some pack mules carried a little keg on either side. Curley, reputed to be one survivor of Custer's immediate command, told his grandson that during the march up Rosebud Creek, he would be sent a message to the rear of the column, and there he noticed soldiers tapping the kegs. He saw these same mules after crossing the divide just before the attack. He said Custer halted the regiment until the mules arrived. Then the kegs were unplugged and the soldiers filed past, each man with a cup. White Man Runs Him told the same story, according to his son-in-law, Robert Yellowtail. Quote, "We scouts joined in. Before long, my fingertips and lips tingled and felt numb. Our interpreter, Mitch Boyer, explained that the whiskey was made to make the soldiers feel brave." Lieutenant E.S. Godfrey said Reno took along a half-gallon keg and refused to share it. Godfrey's assertion cannot be verified, but it is pretty well established that Reno carried a flask obtained from some trader that was observed holding this flask in a horizontal position with his lips conjoined to the orifice. Lieutenant DeRudio came across him chatting with the interpreter, Gerard, in the middle of the Little Bighorn when they paused to water their horses. The major was swigging at a flask when DeRudio splashed by. "What are you trying to do?" Reno asked. "Drown me before I am killed?" Gerard said that after the skirmish line collapsed, he saw Reno pull out a bottle of whiskey and drink everything in it. During the Chicago inquiry, Reno admitted having a flask, but declared that he did not take a nip until long after the retreat from the valley when his battalion was marooned on the bluff. He insisted further that his 1-pint flask was not emptied until 3 days later at the site of Custer's last stand. Burying the dead was very disagreeable, he said, and he shared his pint with Captain French. I think we'll stop there for the video. I hope you guys are still enjoying Son of the Morning Star, Crossing the Little Bighorn by Evan S. Connell. We still got a ways to go, but we're plugging away at it, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye, guys!